Have you ever been tripped up in the use of language in the context of an AIDS story?
Well, I think not in the writing of it, but in the reporting of it. And I found that people with HIV/AIDS can be very sensitive, and understandably so. One thing is when you're talking about different risk groups, and the whole idea of men who have sex with men. And I've learned now not to say gay or homosexual, because there are many men who have sex with men who don't identify as gay. So you have to be sensitive to sort of figure out how they self-identify and then use that language.
One pet peeve of mine is HIV virus, which, of course, HIV stands for human immunodeficiency virus. So if you say HIV virus, you're saying virus twice. On the other hand, saying the HIV can sound awkward. So I guess you have to listen to by ear, but it's good to know when you're doing it. It's like that thing when you break a rule, you should know what rule you're breaking. So I would say the HIV instead of the HIV virus. Another one is AIDS test. There's no such, the AIDS test is a test for the antibody. The AIDS test, the Western blot test for the virus itself is time-consuming and very expensive, and in general is not given to people. What they do test for is the antibody to the virus, which is that first push that your body
So what
makes.
is the right language to use?
The correct language, instead of saying AIDS test, would be HIV antibody test, or if you needed to say AIDS virus antibody test, but it is to the antibody, not the virus.
Another point, I think, of sensitivity is the difference between HIV and AIDS. And people who are infected with HIV are upset if you say they have AIDS. And I suppose it's within the disease condition, there is still a sort of stigma to say whether you have HIV or whether you've advanced to the later stage. So, and that one was also at a state conference where it was a group of people who were living with AIDS who were discussing just various topics that affected them, and they made a clear point of that. And someone actually referenced the story I had written about, but they didn't call my name, but I knew that if it was about AIDS and it was in the state newspaper, it was mine. So they took issue with the whole thing of saying AIDS instead of saying HIV. So what I do now is I just do HIV/AIDS, and that covers everyone.
Bodily fluids. They say, contact with bodily fluids. Well, not all bodily fluids contain HIV or have the potential to contain HIV. So saying bodily fluids is not accurate scientifically. And where it's possible, it's good to specify whether it's blood or semen or vaginal fluids. But of course, urine, tears, so we don't have HIV, so we don't want to confuse people. And another one is safe sex. I think after all these years, we understand that there really isn't completely safe sex. It's safer sex. So you advocate using condoms for safer sex, not 100% safe sex.
I think one that's very confusing for many people to use is orphans and vulnerable children. And I think that may serve the organizations that came up with that construct. If a child has lost both parents, I may say orphans with ease, and believing that it won't be confusing. But often people are talking about orphans and they're talking about a child who's lost one parent. And then it can be confusing because people don't think they have any living parents. So what I often do is instead, I just say what I mean. I think sometimes the best thing to do is not use a label or a phrase when just saying the child had lost her mother or lost both parents.
IV drug abuser. Those have heavy negative connotations, and they're not helpful because not only are they hurtful to people whose behavior you might be trying to describe, but they're also, it's stigmatizing and allows other people to put them in a category of them. So it becomes us versus them. And that's just not helpful in the fight against AIDS. As you know, it's all about behavior. And so if you say prostitute, you can say a woman who's working as a sex worker, or a person who is using drugs. And if you need a pronoun, a noun, it's an IV drug user, not abuser. And it's a person living with AIDS, or a person living with HIV/AIDS.
Have you ever had to argue with an editor about the use of certain types of language and words, and the editor says, look, you're being politically correct? And what's the conversation like, and how do you win?
I'm smiling because I can't even begin to count the number of times, especially about AIDS victim or innocent victim, where I feel very strongly that that making a distinction between innocent and guilty victims is not helpful in the fight against the epidemic. It's not helpful in educating people. And I've had that fight many times with people who pound the table and say, no, you know, this person is a victim and this person is innocent, and we need to say it that way. And I've never put my name on anything that I've lost that battle, and I've never taken my name off anything. So I think what usually happens is, the worst that's ever happened is I let it go for the next draft and fought the battle again the next day. And when people know that I'm really serious about that, we just take it out.
Often what I'll do when I'm with my editor is explain why I've used something. And I'll write notes to say, okay, make sure, because, you know, things get changed as they go through the copy desk for length, and, you know, gay might be shorter than homosexual, or gay is definitely shorter than men who have sex with men, and so they want to save some space, so they might change something. And sometimes I'll put notes to say, make sure this isn't changed. So, and that's the challenge too of being a newspaper reporter, and I'm sure in any kind of reporting, is that there are lots of other people who see and touch a story before it gets into the paper.
I have two general rules about this. One is to try to make my copy as clear as possible, so that there's as little jargon in it as I can edit out. The second rule, though, is to present people who are HIV positive as any other people. Besides that, I try to explain things as I see them, and I try, if you come to them with the mind that they are no different from anyone else, you treat them as you would any person in any story. And I think if that's your perspective, that sort of gets away from any kind of bias or prejudice you may have against them.